My name is Watson, and I live in a small, quiet town where everyone knows each other. I enjoy hosting dinner parties at my house and bringing friends together for good food and conversation. It was a warm summer evening when I decided to host another dinner party, inviting my closest friends. Little did I know that this night would turn into a mystery that still haunts me. I spent the entire day preparing for the party. The table was set with my best dishes, and the house was filled with the aroma of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread. As the sun set, casting a warm glow through the windows, my friends started to arrive. Sarah, Mark, Lisa, and John were all there, along with a new friend, Tom, who had recently moved to town. Tom was a bit of a mystery, quiet and reserved, but I thought it would be nice to include him in our group. He seemed happy to be invited, and I hoped he would enjoy the evening with us. We all gathered around the table, laughing and sharing stories as we ate. The dinner went smoothly, with everyone enjoying the food and each other's company. After dessert, we moved to the living room to continue our conversations. Tom was unusually quiet, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he was just shy, or perhaps he didn't feel comfortable yet. As the evening progressed, Tom's mood seemed to shift. He became tense and irritable, barely speaking and avoiding eye contact. I noticed but didn't want to make him feel uncomfortable by asking in front of everyone. Eventually, he stood up abruptly, muttering something about needing to leave. Before I could say anything, he was out the door, slamming it behind him. We all sat in stunned silence, unsure of what had just happened. After a few moments, we tried to brush it off and continued the evening, though the mood had shifted. The night eventually came to an end, and my friends said their goodbyes, still puzzled by Tom's sudden departure. Next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to check on Tom, hoping to find out what had upset him. I went to his house, but there was no answer when I knocked. His car was in the driveway, but it seemed as if no one was home. I left, thinking he might need some space. A few days passed, and I still hadn't heard from Tom. I reached out to my friends, but no one had seen or heard from him. I decided to call the police and report him missing. They took my statement and assured me they would look into it. Weeks turned into months, and there was still no sign of Tom. The police had searched his house, talked to neighbors, and followed every lead, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. My friends and I were left with more questions than answers. One evening, I found myself going over the events of that night again and again in my mind. What had caused Tom to leave so suddenly? I couldn't help but feel responsible, wondering if I had missed some sign or if there was something I could have done to prevent it. Determined to find some answers, I started looking into Tom's past. I learned that he had moved to our town after a difficult breakup and was looking for a fresh start. He didn't have many friends, and his family lived far away. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I knew about him. One night, while I was alone in my house, I heard a noise outside. It was a faint rustling, like someone was moving through the bushes. My heart raced as I peered out the window, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The noise stopped, and I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. In the following nights, the noises continued: footsteps, whispers, and the feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there. My sleep was disturbed, and I felt on edge all the time. One evening, I found an old journal in Tom's house that the police had overlooked. It was filled with his thoughts and feelings, revealing a troubled mind. He wrote about feeling out of place, not just in our town, but in life. The entries grew darker, filled with paranoia and fear. The last entry was dated the night of the dinner party. It read, "I can't escape it. It's always watching, waiting. I need to leave before it's too late." Reading those words sent a chill down my spine. What had Tom been so afraid of? I shared the journal with the police, but it didn't provide any concrete answers. They continued their investigation, but the trail had gone cold. As time passed, the memory of that night faded for everyone except me. I couldn't let it go, haunted by the unknown. I often found myself staring out into the darkness, listening for those faint noises, wondering if Tom was out there somewhere, lost and scared. My friends tried to comfort me, but the mystery remained unsolved. Tom was gone, and we might never know what happened to him. The dinner party that had ended happily for the rest of us had left a shadow over my life, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary moments can turn into the most inexplicable mysteries. In the quiet moments when I'm alone with my thoughts, I still think of Tom and that fateful night. The unanswered questions linger, a ghost that refuses to be laid to rest. And so, I continue to search for answers, hoping that one day the mystery will be solved and Tom's story will finally have an ending. It was a Saturday night in 2016, and I was utterly exhausted after a long week of work. I decided to go to bed early, hoping to catch up on some much-needed sleep. My small apartment was quiet, with only the occasional hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. I crawled into bed around 9 p.m., pulling the covers up to my chin, and soon drifted off into a deep sleep. My dreams were vivid, filled with strange and unsettling images, but I couldn't wake up. It felt like I was trapped in my sleep, unable to move or open my eyes. When I finally did woke up, it was still dark outside. I reached for my phone on the nightstand to check the time. It was 3:33 a.m. Groggily, I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. As I looked around the room, something made my heart race. There was another bed in my room, right next to mine. I was certain it hadn't been there when I went to sleep. My apartment was small, just a one-bedroom unit, and there was no space for an extra bed. I blinked several times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the bed remained. It was identical to mine, with white sheets and a dark wooden frame. But what terrified me was the figure lying in the bed. Someone was under the white sheet, completely still. The sheet was pulled up over their head, obscuring their face. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I stared at the figure. Who could it be? No one else had keys to my apartment, and I hadn't invited anyone over. I wanted to scream, but my voice seemed stuck in my throat. My mind raced as I tried to decide what to do. Should I call the police? I quietly got out of bed, trying to make as little noise as possible. My heart pounded in my chest as I tiptoed to the door, reaching for the light switch. My hand trembled so much that I missed it the first time. When I finally turned on the light, the figure didn't move. The room was now brightly lit, and I could see the sheet. It looked old and worn, with small stains on it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I slowly walked over to the bed, my eyes never leaving the figure. As I got closer, I could see that the sheet was thin, almost transparent. I could make out the shape of the person's body underneath, but their face was still hidden. My hand shook as I reached out to touch the sheet. Just as my fingers brushed against the fabric, the figure moved. I jumped back, my heart racing. The figure sat up slowly, the sheet still covering them. They turned their head toward me, and I could feel their eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. I was frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. The figure stood up, still wrapped in the sheet. They were tall, taller than anyone I knew. They took a step toward me, and I finally found my voice. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond. They just stood there, silently watching me. I backed away, my mind racing with fear. I had to get out of there. I turned and ran toward the door, my hands fumbling with the lock. I could hear the figure's footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. Finally, I managed to unlock the door and ran out into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running until I was outside, the cool night air hitting my face. I leaned against the building, trying to catch my breath, my mind spinning with questions. Who was that? How did they get into my apartment? I knew I couldn't go back in there alone, so I called the police. When the officers arrived, I explained what had happened. They looked at me with concern and asked me to wait outside while they checked the apartment. I paced back and forth, my heart still racing. After what felt like an eternity, the officers came back out. "There's no one in there," one of them said. "We checked every room. Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" I knew what I had seen, but I didn't argue. I thanked the officers and watched as they drove away. I stood there for a long time, staring up at my apartment window. Finally, I gathered the courage to go back inside. The extra bed was gone, and there was no sign of the figure. Everything was exactly as it had been before I went to sleep. I checked all the doors and windows, but they were all locked. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that whoever or whatever had been in my room had vanished without a trace. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, sitting on the couch with all the lights on. The experience left me shaken, and I still don't have an explanation for what happened. I moved to a new apartment soon after, hoping to leave the memory behind. But sometimes late at night, I still feel like someone is watching me. I can't help but wonder if the figure in the white sheet will ever return. My name is John, and I enjoy taking my family on little adventures. Living in the city, we often crave an escape to the countryside. One summer, I rented an old farmhouse on Airbnb. It seemed perfect, a big yard with rustic charm, and even a pool. It looked like the ideal spot to relax for a weekend. We arrived on a sunny Friday afternoon. My wife Julian and our two kids, Liam and Zoe, were excited. The farmhouse stood at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by trees. It had a wide porch with creaky wooden steps, and the inside was filled with antique furniture and old photographs. It felt like stepping back in time. After unpacking, we decided to spend the evening by the pool. The kids splashed around while Julian and I sat on the edge, dipping our feet in the cool water. The air was fresh, and the only sounds were the kids' laughter and the gentle rustling of leaves. As night fell, we set up some lights around the pool and had dinner outside. The stars were bright, and everything seemed perfect until I heard it. A crunching sound, like someone walking on dry leaves, caught my attention. I looked around, but it was dark beyond the reach of our lights. Julian noticed my concern. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "I'm sure it's just an animal," she replied, trying to sound calm. But the sounds continued, and they seemed to be getting closer. I told the kids to get out of the pool and go inside. We quickly gathered our things, and I locked the door behind us. Inside, the house felt safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I checked all the windows and doors, making sure they were locked. Julian and I put the kids to bed, and I kept a flashlight and my phone nearby. Hours passed, and the house was quiet. Just as I started to relax, there was a loud knock on the door. My heart jumped. I grabbed the flashlight and looked through the peephole. A man stood outside wearing a police uniform. "Open up, it's the police," he called out. I hesitated. Why would the police be here at this hour? I decided to call out through the door. "Why are you here?" I asked. "There's been a report of suspicious activity." "Please open the door," he replied. Something didn't feel right. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. I decided to call the local police station to verify. As I dialed, the man outside knocked again, harder this time. "Open the door now," he shouted. The dispatcher at the police station answered, and I quickly explained the situation. They said they hadn't sent anyone to our location and advised me to stay inside and lock everything. They were sending real officers to our address. Fear gripped me. I told Julian to take the kids and hide in one of the bedrooms. I could hear the man outside trying the door handle. I went to the living room and turned off all the lights, peeking through the curtains. More figures were moving around outside. Minutes felt like hours as we waited. The knocking continued, and the man claimed to be the police, demanding we open the door. I knew he wasn't telling the truth. My phone buzzed. The real police were almost there. Suddenly, the fake officer started banging on the windows, trying to find a way in. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't break the glass. Finally, I saw the flashing lights of a police car coming down the long driveway. Figures outside scattered into the woods. Real police officers arrived and checked the area but found no sign of the imposters. They assured us we were safe but suggested we find another place to stay for the night. They said it wasn't common, but sometimes people posed as officers to gain entry to homes. Their intentions were unknown, but it was clear they meant no good. We packed our bags and left the farmhouse, heading to a nearby hotel. The kids were scared but safe. Julian and I were shaken but relieved. As we drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if we had opened the door. It was a frightening experience that reminded me to always trust my instincts and verify before letting anyone in. We never found out who the fake police were or what they wanted, but we were thankful for the real officers who arrived just in time. That night changed the way I think about safety, and I'm more cautious now, especially when renting places in unfamiliar areas. Our little adventure turned into a night of terror, but we were lucky to come out of it unharmed. It was a lesson learned, and from then on, I made sure to always double-check everything and stay alert, no matter how safe a place seemed. When I was young, I had a deep passion for exploring abandoned places. The mystery of old, empty buildings always drew me in. The thought that these spaces once bustled with life, but now stood silent, fascinated me. I loved the thrill of stepping into the past, seeing the decay of what was once new, and sensing the history that lingered in the air. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned school in our town. The building had been deserted for years, and countless stories surrounded it. Rumors of it being haunted intrigued us, and we wanted to see for ourselves if they were true. It was the perfect night for our adventure. We met at my house, packing flashlights, snacks, and our phones. There were 4 of us: Tom, Lisa, Sarah, and me. We were all excited and a little scared as we made our way to the school, sharing the eerie tales we had heard. Some people claimed to have heard strange noises inside, while others swore they saw shadows moving in the windows at night. When we reached the school, it looked even creepier than we had imagined. The windows were broken, the doors were broken, the doors were boarded up, and vines had taken over the walls. The paint was peeling, and the place looked like it belonged in a horror movie. We found a way in through a broken window at the back of the building. One by one, we climbed through, trying to be as quiet as possible. Once inside, we turned on our flashlights. The beams cut through the darkness, revealing dusty hallways and old lockers. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. We decided to stick together, not wanting to get lost in the maze of corridors. As we walked, our footsteps echoed loudly, every sound seeming amplified in the empty building. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive. We started in the main hallway where the principal's office was located. The door was slightly ajar, and we pushed it open slowly. Inside, the room was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere, and the desk was overturned. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. A shiver ran down my spine as I wondered what could have caused such chaos. Next, we moved to the classrooms. Each one was filled with old desks and chairs, some broken, others covered in dust. Books were left open on the desks, their pages yellowed with age. It felt as if the students had just left and never returned. In one classroom, we found a chalkboard with strange writing on it. The words were smeared and hard to read, but they looked like some kind of warning. Tom, always the brave one, laughed it off, saying it was probably just kids playing a prank. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it gave me. As we continued exploring, we suddenly heard a loud bang from somewhere in the building. We all froze, our hearts pounding. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. We nodded, our eyes wide with fear. Despite every instinct telling us to leave, we decided to investigate. We followed the sound down a long, dark hallway. The walls were lined with old photos of students and teachers, their faces smiling and happy. It felt eerie, as if they were watching us. At the end of the hallway, we reached the gymnasium. The doors were closed, but strange noises were coming from inside. With a deep breath, Tom pushed the doors open. The gym was huge, and our flashlights barely lit up the far corners. We stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath our feet. In the middle of the gym, we saw something that made our blood run cold. A figure stood there, dressed in old, tattered clothes. It was facing away from us, but we could see its shoulders rising and falling, as if it were breathing heavily. We stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, the figure turned around and we saw its face. It was pale and gaunt with dark, sunken eyes. It looked right at us and let out a chilling scream. We ran. I don't remember how we got out of the gym or the building, only the pure terror that drove us to flee. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the school, panting and out of breath. We never went back to that school. The experience haunted us for a long time. We couldn't explain what we saw that night, and we didn't want to try. Our passion for exploring abandoned places was gone, replaced by a fear of what we might find. That night taught us that some places are better left alone. The abandoned school still stands, a silent reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the dark. And I, for one, am happy to leave it that way. I was working the graveyard shift at the gas station. The night was quiet, and I was halfway through my shift. The store was empty except for the hum of the refrigerators and the soft buzz of the overhead lights. As I stocked shelves, the chime of the door caught my attention. A woman entered, holding a young boy's hand, both of them looking terrified. Her clothes were torn, and her face was streaked with tears. The boy clung to her side, his eyes wide with fear. She approached the counter, her voice trembling, and asked if she could use the phone. I handed it to her, noticing how her hands shook as she dialed. The boy stayed close, his gaze darting nervously around the store. I couldn't imagine what they had been through. As the woman spoke urgently into the phone, I tried not to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help catching fragments of her conversation. She was desperately trying to reach someone for help. After the call, she asked if they could stay in the store for a while. I could see she was desperate, so I told her they could stay as long as they needed. I offered them some free drinks and snacks. The woman's face softened slightly as she thanked me. They settled into a corner, the boy quietly eating a candy bar while the woman sipped from a water bottle. I kept a close eye on them, making sure they felt safe. As the night dragged on, a sense of unease grew in my stomach. I didn't know what had happened to them, but it was clear they were running from something or someone. About an hour later, the door chimed again, this time with an aggressive clatter. A man stormed in, his face twisted with anger. "There you are," he shouted, making a beeline for the woman and the boy. The woman shrank back, pulling her son closer. "Sir, you need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I stepped between him and the woman. "Get out of my way," he roared. "She's coming with me." He tried to push past me, but I held my ground. The woman was crying now, clutching her son protectively. "Sir, I'm calling the police," I warned, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for the phone. The man's eyes flashed with rage, and he lunged at me, knocking the phone out of my hand. It clattered to the floor, but I quickly grabbed it and dialed 911. "Help. We need police at the gas station on Elm Street," I shouted into the phone. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way. but it felt like an eternity before I heard the sirens. The man continued to shout, trying to drag the woman out of the store. I stood in his way, hoping to buy time. The boy was crying now, his face buried in his mother's side. Finally, the police arrived. 2 officers burst through the door, guns drawn. "Step away from them," one of the officers commanded. The man hesitated, then raised his hands, his face still contorted with anger. The officers moved quickly, handcuffing him and escorting him out to the squad car. The woman collapsed onto a chair, sobbing with relief. The boy held onto her, still frightened but visibly relieved that the man was gone. One of the officers stayed behind to talk to the woman. She explained that the man was her boyfriend and had been abusive. She had finally managed to escape with her son and sought refuge in the gas station. The officer assured her that she was safe now and that they would help her find a place to stay. A wave of relief washed over me. The situation had been terrifying, but I was glad I could help. The woman thanked me repeatedly, tears of gratitude in her eyes. I told her it was no problem, just glad she and her son were safe. The police took the man away, and the officer stayed with the woman until a social worker arrived. They arranged for her and her son to stay at a safe house for the night. As they left, the woman turned to me one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. I nodded, watching as they walked out into the night, finally safe from harm. The store was quiet again, the only sounds were the hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of the lights. But the night felt different now. I had faced something terrifying and helped someone in need. The graveyard shift had never felt so important. As the hours passed and morning light began to filter through the windows, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman and her son. I hoped they would find peace and safety in their new life, and I hoped that, in some small way, I had made a difference. The memory of that night stayed with me, a reminder of the strength it takes to stand up to fear and the power of kindness in the face of danger.